So now we've created our first component, we're now going to move on and look at what kind of information that's generated, and then the sort of things that we can do once we've created that basic geometry. So we're going to look in the browser first, and you can see under our base plate I can now expand that, and it will actually show you that we've got some files underneath the base plate in the browser. The origin, it's carrying its own origin, but that's currently turned off. We've got a folder called bodies, and bodies contains the 3D geometry that's related to this component. So in this case it's our base plate model that we've just created. And then we've got a folder called sketches, which is carrying the sketch information that we use to actually create that particular body. Now, one of the things to notice here is the light bulb for that sketch is actually blue, so it's been turned off. Fusion has done that automatically. Once we've created a body using the sketch, it assumes we've finished using that sketch and sort of files it away. It actually keeps it, but it suppresses it so it's not visible in the workspace anymore. If you do need to see that sketch again, you can just hit the light bulb and turn that back on. So under the bodies menu, I'm just going to show you if I hover over body 1 and right click, it brings up this menu, and just above halfway there's an option called properties, and when I click on this it actually brings up the properties of this particular body. So it knows the area, it knows the volume, and it's making an assumption about what the physical material for this particular part is to actually generate how heavy it is. Now in this case it's assuming it's made of steel, and that's because Fusion starts every piece of modelling as assuming that the part's going to be made out of steel. That's something that you can change in the preferences. You can change the default modelling material to something else if that's what you want to do, but by default it generally uses steel to create components. But as we go along, what we can actually do is change that physical material to something else as our component design progresses, and we're going to do that in a second. But what you'll see at the moment is the physical material is steel, and therefore the mass is actually being calculated out as just over 1,000 grams, so just over a kilogram. I've also got some other information here, such as the centre of mass and the moment of inertia, which might be useful for certain other calculations. But that properties box is a very useful resource for information about areas, volumes, masses, and some other properties of the 3D body that's on the screen. So I'm just going to click OK to get rid of that. And now we're going to move to the modify menu. We've done some work in sketch and create, and we're on this left to right journey, so we're now able to take advantage of what lies underneath the modify menu. And the ability to change the physical material is under the modify menu. About 3/4 of the way down there's an option called physical material, which when I click on that brings up this materials library, and from this materials library I'm able to look into each of these folders and find an appropriate material that I want to apply to this particular model. And the way of doing that is simply to find the material that you want, and in this case I want ABS plastic, which is in this list under plastic, and to apply it to the particular component on the screen, all I need to do is drag it out of the library and drop it onto the component. And what you'll see is that that has now changed the appearance of the component, so it's now got a different appearance because the default colour for ABS plastic is this kind of off-white colour, and it's actually changed both the appearance and the physical material. If I now go back to the bodies menu and choose that properties option again, you'll see that it now says the physical material is ABS plastic, the appearance is ABS brackets white, and it's also given me now a different mass. So the area is the same, the volume is the same, but the mass is now 136 grams and not a kilogram. So that's probably a much more appropriate material to make something like this from. So 136 grams is a much lower weight obviously than a kilogram. And I can actually change to other materials and obviously see the effect of using maybe a different plastic and see what difference that makes to the weight. Now I can do this as we go along, as we develop the components, to actually add in the physical material, because it might be useful at the very end to actually get an overall weight of the complete assembly. So that's how we can modify the physical material, and that's how we access what the effects of that are through this properties dialog box that's accessed via a right click over the body in the browser menu. Also in the modify menu there's lots of other really useful tools, and we're going to introduce the first couple of these, and they're called fillet and rule fillet. So fillet is a really good command. It's the ability to add a radius into a sharp corner, which can often be a really good practice to use. And once I've got fillet connected, then basically I can just go around, and as I hover over edges that are capable of accepting fillets, you'll see the line will change to a very thick black line. That indicates that I'm able to choose that as a fillet. And I'm just going to go around and choose a few of these just so that you can see the effect. And when I do this and I drag the arrow, you can see it starts to drag a fillet into that corner, or a radius into that corner. Now I think probably around 5mm looks a good radius, and obviously I'll go around and do all of the rest of those to make this appearance look more uniform. But I'm just going to concentrate on these few that you can see closest to me on the screen at the moment. Once I click OK, that's created those fillet radius in all of these corners. If I now go back to the modify menu, rule fillet is the ability to pick on a face. So if I pick on this top face, for instance, I can now actually click and introduce a radius, in this case 1mm, into every edge that's connected to that face, and that's a really quick way of putting fillets in a really quick manner. So you can do it all in one go. Just select the face, and then it will put a fillet radius into every edge that it can see connected to that face. And if I click on OK, you can see what that's done. And I'm going to do that on the other side as well. I'm going to add a 1mm fillet. So you can do that, add those fillets into all of those corners, and then use the rule fillet tool to actually put a 1mm fillet on the top and bottom face of our component. So we've started to see what we can do now we've done our create element, into what we can do with our modify tools. Down in the timeline you'll notice we've got 4 things now. We've got the original sketch that we produced this from, we've got the extrude command that we produced this from, we've got a fillet command to add the fillets into the corners, you'll see they're highlighted on the screen, and finally we've got the rule fillet. So we've got 4 commands now in our timeline underneath this component. And one of the powerful things that Fusion can do is you are able to right click on any of these particular commands, and you'll find an edit option under there. So I could go in and edit sketch, for instance. If I went in and modified, say, that 25 and made that 35, hit enter, you'll see that all of those repeats of that particular sketch update, because they know they're related to that particular one. And if I now hit stop sketch, it will rebuild the model with that much bigger radius in there. So that's one of the things that you can do by editing a sketch. I could, for instance, edit the thickness, so I could make it 10mm. It still adds in these fillets that come afterwards. I'm just going to undo that. I can right click, edit that fillet, maybe that fillet could be 10mm, and all it does is it just keeps updating the model with any change that you make to any of these things that I did earlier in the construction of this part. So that's a really powerful part of Fusion 360, the ability to go back and make changes as your design develops. But we've now got the basis of our first component, and you've seen how we can modify it. In the next video we're going to copy and paste this, because we need 2 occurrences of it, and then create the central core of our hexapod.